More counties under winter storm warning than any time in American history. Over 1,300. Right now, that number alone is remarkable. This isn't just another cold snap, another routine winter event you watch on the news and forget by next week. This is the kind of storm that gets remembered, the kind that gets a name, the kind that, decades from now, people will reference when they talk about bad winters. They'll say, "Remember that January?" And everyone will know exactly what they mean. But here's what makes this even more remarkable. The county warning record is just one of many records this storm has shattered. In the past 72 hours, this single weather system has rewritten the history books in ways meteorologists are still trying to fully comprehend. Flight cancellations that dwarf typical winter delays. Ice accumulation that's bending trees to the breaking point across states that rarely see ice at all. Emergency declarations in 18 states, and counting. And perhaps most staggering of all, half the country, literally half of the United States, is in this storm's grip right now, at this very moment, as you watch this. Stay with me over the next several minutes, because we're going to uncover exactly how one storm managed to break so many records simultaneously, why this winter event stands apart from everything we've experienced in recent memory, and what's happening right now in communities from Texas to Maine, as people navigate conditions that most of them have never seen before in their lifetimes. This storm started its march across the country earlier this week, and with each hour that passes, it continues to add new records to an already historic list. When weather systems move across the United States, they typically follow predictable patterns: cold air from Canada, moisture from the Gulf, the clash between them creating winter weather across a region. We've seen this countless times, but what's unfolding right now defies those typical patterns in almost every measurable way. The geographic scope alone, stretching from the Mexican border to the Canadian border, from the Rocky Mountains to the Atlantic Ocean, creates impacts on a scale that modern weather forecasting has rarely documented. And it's not just the size, it's the intensity within that size. It's the duration. It's the fact that this storm is hitting regions with conditions they're completely unprepared to handle, while simultaneously overwhelming areas that deal with winter weather every single year. Right now, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what conditions are like where you are, because this storm looks different depending on your location. Someone in Dallas is experiencing something completely different from someone in Chicago, and yet you're both caught in the same massive system. Your experience matters. Your story is part of this unfolding history, and as you share where you are, you'll see in the comments section just how vast this event truly is. Names of towns and cities spanning thousands of miles, all connected by this single storm. The warning that over 1,300 counties are under winter storm alerts isn't just a number to impress you. Let me put that in perspective. The United States has roughly 3,000 counties total. That means more than 40% of every county in America is currently under an official warning for dangerous winter weather. 40%. When you think about the diversity of this country, the deserts of the Southwest, the mild climates of the Southeast, the mountains, the plains, the coasts, having nearly half of all counties simultaneously warned about the same storm system is extraordinary. It suggests a weather event so massive, so powerful, that it's overwhelming regional differences, pushing winter conditions into places that rarely experience them, and intensifying conditions in places that thought they'd seen everything winter could throw at them. But that record, as stunning as it is, tells only part of the story. This storm has also triggered flight cancellations on a scale that rivals some of the worst travel disruption days in American aviation history. Thousands of flights grounded. Not delayed, cancelled entirely. Major airports from Dallas-Fort Worth to Chicago O'Hare to Philadelphia to LaGuardia have been operating at fractions of their normal capacity, and in some cases have temporarily ceased operations altogether as runways become unsafe to use and aircraft become too difficult to dice fast enough to maintain any kind of schedule. The ripple effects of these cancellations spread beyond just the people trying to travel today. Crews are out of position. Aircraft are stuck in wrong cities. The backlog of passengers will take days to clear even after conditions improve. And for an industry that prides itself on keeping America connected, on maintaining schedules through almost any condition, The necessary operational adjustments illustrate the storm's severity. Ice accumulation records are falling in cities across the south and Midwest. We're talking about ice, not snow, but actual ice coating every surface, building up on power lines, weighing down tree branches until they snap, making roads not just slippery, but essentially impassable. Some locations are reporting ice thickness measurements among the highest in their recorded history. And ice is uniquely dangerous in ways that snow isn't. Snow you can plough. Snow you can shovel. Snow, for all its inconvenience, can be managed. Ice is far more difficult to manage. Ice brings down power lines. Ice closes roads not because they're blocked, but because nothing can safely move on them. Ice can cause tree branches to break and fall, potentially damaging roofs or vehicles. And this storm is producing that ice across a massive swath of territory, in places where the infrastructure wasn't designed for it, where power companies don't have the same experience managing ice-related outages, where residents don't have the knowledge base built from years of dealing with these conditions. 18 states have declared states of emergency. 18. That's more than a third of the country's states activating emergency protocols simultaneously. State emergency declarations aren't issued lightly. They free up resources, allow for emergency spending, activate National Guard units if needed, suspend certain regulations to speed up response efforts. When a governor declares a state of emergency, it's an acknowledgement that normal operations cannot handle what's happening, that extraordinary measures are required. To see 18 states make that declaration because of a single weather system is to understand that we're not talking about a bad winter storm in the traditional sense. We're talking about an event that's stretching emergency management capabilities across multiple states at once. And the power outages hundreds of thousands of homes and businesses sitting in darkness and cold. Some of those outages will be resolved quickly as crews restore service to areas where the fix is simple. But others, particularly in areas where ice has brought down entire sections of power line, where poles have failed and substations have been affected, those outages could persist for days. Imagine being without power right now, in the middle of this cold, with no clear answer on when it might return. Imagine being elderly, or having young children, or relying on medical equipment that needs electricity. The human dimension of those numbers, hundreds of thousands without power, represents families making difficult decisions, seeking shelter, trying to stay warm, hoping that help comes soon. How does one storm break so many records at once? That's the question that keeps coming back. In weather terms, storms are typically bounded by geography, by season, by the specific atmospheric conditions that create them. A hurricane hits a coastline, a tornado strikes a community, a blizzard buries a region. But this storm is doing all of these things, creating blizzard conditions in some places, ice storms in others, coastal impacts in others, all at the same time, all as part of one continuous system. The atmospheric setup that created this storm involved a collision of air masses so stark, so dramatic, that the energy released is manifesting as winter weather across half a continent. Arctic air plunging south, meeting moisture-laden systems, the jet stream configuration holding everything in place long enough for impacts to accumulate rather than just passing through. It's still happening. Right now. While you're watching this, snow is falling measured in feet in some locations. Ice is accumulating on surfaces across multiple states. Temperatures are plummeting to dangerous levels. Wind is creating visibility conditions that make travel extremely hazardous, and make even being outside hazardous. This isn't a retrospective. This isn't looking back at what happened. This is reporting on what is actively unfolding, what is continuing to develop, what hasn't finished yet. And that ongoing nature adds another layer to the challenge communities can't begin full recovery, because the event itself hasn't ended. Crews are working around the clock, but they're working in conditions that continue to deteriorate in some areas, that continue to present new challenges even as old ones are being addressed. In the next several minutes, we're going to travel across this storm's path, understand what's happening in each region, hear about the people living through it, examine why this storm has been able to accomplish what it's accomplishing, and look at what history tells us about events like this. Because while this storm is unprecedented in many ways, winter has always tested Americans. Winter has always revealed both our vulnerabilities and our strengths. And what we're watching unfold right now is that same ancient dynamic playing out on a scale that none of us expected to see. To understand this storm, you have to see it the way it's actually manifesting across the landscape. You have to picture what's happening right now in different corners of the country, all at the same moment, all driven by the same massive weather system that has essentially split America into those being pounded by winter and those watching from the sidelines. Start in Texas. Texas, where ice storms are rare enough to be memorable decades later, where infrastructure isn't built with frequent winter weather in mind because the climate simply doesn't demand it, where most winters might see one or two minor events that last a day and then melt away. Right now, portions of Texas are coated in ice, not a light glaze, not a dusting that looks pretty on tree branches. Actual accumulation thick, heavy ice weighing down everything it touches. Dallas, a major metropolitan area that keeps moving no matter what, is largely paralysed. Highways that normally pulse with traffic sit empty because the ice makes them unsafe to use. Trees throughout residential neighbourhoods are bending under weight they were never designed to bear. Power lines, many of which are above ground in Texas, are sagging under the ice load, and when they snap, and they are snapping, the outages cascade across neighbourhoods. For Texans who lived through the 2021 winter power crisis, there's an unavoidable sense of terrible familiarity, an echo of that fear and cold and uncertainty. This storm isn't the same event, but it's hitting some of the same vulnerabilities, exposing some of the same infrastructure gaps. Move north into Oklahoma and Kansas. These states know winter. They plan for it. They have the equipment to handle it. And yet, even here, this storm is pushing conditions beyond what's considered normal or manageable. Oklahoma City is dealing with snow measured not in inches, but approaching a foot in some areas, with drifting that makes those measurements deceptive 2 feet or more, where wind has piled snow into impassable barriers. Roads that were cleared hours ago are drifted shut again. Kansas, sitting in the central corridor of this storm, is experiencing blizzard conditions, not just heavy snow, but snow combined with wind strong enough to reduce visibility to near zero. When visibility drops that low, roads become extremely difficult to navigate safely, even if they've been ploughed. You can't see where you're going. You can't see other vehicles. You can't see the edge of the road. Travel becomes not just inadvisable, but genuinely dangerous. Slide east into Missouri and Arkansas. Missouri is being hit with what meteorologists call a mixed precipitation event, which is clinical language for a miserable combination of snow, sleet and freezing rain, all happening at once or in waves. St. Louis, Kansas City major population centres are locked down, schools closed, businesses shuttered, roads treacherous with layers of ice under layers of snow, creating surfaces that no amount of salt or sand can make truly safe. Arkansas, particularly the northern part of the state, is experiencing ice accumulations that are breaking records, bending and snapping trees, bringing down power lines, turning roads into skating rinks. The storm's reach extends into the Ohio Valley, Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, West Virginia. These are states accustomed to winter weather, states with snow removal budgets and equipment, states where residents know how to drive in snow. And still, this storm is overwhelming local capacity. Columbus, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, Louisville, all of these cities are grappling with road conditions that make even essential travel dangerous. The ice component, particularly in Kentucky and southern portions of Ohio and Indiana, is creating the same tree damage and power line problems that Texas and Arkansas are experiencing. But layered on top of that is heavy snow farther north, creating a dual challenge ice damage in southern areas, snow removal challenges in northern areas, and limited resources to address both simultaneously. Push farther north into Illinois, Iowa, and Wisconsin. Chicago, that iconic winter city that prides itself on keeping moving no matter how much snow falls, is buried. Snowfall totals exceeding a foot in the hardest hit areas, wind creating drifts significantly higher. The city's massive snow removal operation, one of the most sophisticated in the world, is working non-stop, but even they're struggling to keep up with the rate of accumulation and the drifting conditions. Iowa is being hit particularly hard. Rural roads are impassable, leaving farm families isolated. Small towns are cut off from larger communities. The wind across Iowa's open farmland is creating ground blizzard conditions where even if snow stopped falling, existing snow is being whipped into the air, making visibility just as bad as if the snow were still coming down. Wisconsin, no stranger to harsh winters, is dealing with extreme cold on top of the snow temperatures that make even brief exposure hazardous, that create concerns beyond just the inconvenience of snow removal. The storm's eastern edge is battering the mid-Atlantic and northeast. Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, all experiencing significant impacts, though the exact nature of those impacts varies by location. Philadelphia is dealing with heavy snow inland and ice closer to the coast. New York City is experiencing a mix that's particularly difficult to manage: snow in some boroughs, ice in others. The sheer population density meaning that even moderate accumulations create enormous logistical challenges. The coastal areas of New Jersey and Delaware are facing not just snow and ice, but coastal flooding concerns as the storm system drives strong onshore winds coinciding with high tide cycles. Roads flood even as snow falls, a surreal combination that doubles the hazards. Boston, at the northeastern extent of the storm's reach, is getting hit with significant snow and powerful winds, creating the kind of nor'easter conditions that New Englanders know well, but that still shut down the region when they arrive with this much intensity. This geographic sweep from the Mexican border to the Canadian border, from the Rocky Mountain Front Range to the Atlantic coast, represents a storm footprint so large that it defies easy comprehension. If you laid a map of Europe over the United States, this storm would be impacting an area roughly equivalent to everything from Spain to Poland. It's that big, and within that enormous footprint, conditions aren't uniform, but they're all dangerous in their own ways. Someone in Dallas facing ice is in just as much danger as someone in Chicago facing blizzard conditions. The hazards are different, but the seriousness is the same. What makes this geographic scope so remarkable is that typically winter storms are regional events. The South gets ice storms, the Midwest gets blizzards, the Northeast gets nor'easters. Rarely do you see a single system capable of producing all of these different types of winter weather simultaneously across such vast distances. It requires a very specific atmospheric setup, the right positioning of high and low pressure systems, the right track of the storm, the right temperature profiles at different levels of the atmosphere, the right moisture availability. All of those elements have come together in a way that happens perhaps once or twice in a lifetime, creating what we're witnessing right now. And it's not just the breadth, but the duration. This storm system has been impacting portions of its track for 3 days now. Some locations that got hit early are still buried, still without power, still paralysed, while other locations farther east are just now experiencing the worst of conditions. The storm isn't racing through, it's grinding across the country at a pace that allows impacts to accumulate, that gives snow time to pile up to remarkable depths, that lets ice build to dangerous thickness. A fast-moving storm drops its snow and moves on. This storm is taking its time, and that persistence is part of why the impacts are so severe. Right now, as you watch this, as you read these words, every single scenario I've just described is actively happening. The ice in Texas is still accumulating. The blizzard in Kansas is still raging. The snow in Chicago is still falling. The coastal flooding in New Jersey is still threatening homes. It's all happening at once, all part of the same event, all connected by this one massive storm system that has essentially divided the country. And for the millions of people living through these conditions, the geographic scope doesn't matter as much as the very specific reality outside their windows, the ice coating their trees, the snow burying their cars, the cold seeping through their walls, the uncertainty about when it will end. But describing where the storm hit and what conditions look like only takes us so far in understanding why this is historic. The numbers behind this storm, the actual measurements and counts and comparisons, reveal just how far outside normal this event truly is. how significant the records being broken actually are. Numbers can feel abstract, just digits on a screen, until you understand what they represent. The numbers associated with this storm aren't just statistics for weather enthusiasts to debate. They're measurements of impact, quantifications of disruption, evidence of why this storm has earned its place in history. Start with the county warning number again, because it's so staggering it deserves deeper examination. Over 1,300 counties under winter storm warnings. To put that in perspective, a winter storm warning is issued when conditions are expected to be severe enough to create significant hazardous or property-damaging impacts. It's not a watch, which suggests conditions might develop. It's not an advisory, which suggests minor impacts. It's a warning the highest alert level for winter weather, and 1,300 counties receive that designation simultaneously. When you try to visualize that, try to picture a map of the United States with over 1,300 counties highlighted, you begin to grasp the scale. It covers regions that rarely see these warnings. It covers regions that see them every winter, but rarely with this level of intensity. It represents weather forecasters in offices from Texas to Maine, all looking at their data and coming to the same conclusion: what's coming requires serious preparation. Flight cancellations are approaching numbers that typically only occur during the worst travel disruption events, hurricanes hitting major airport hubs, technology failures that ground entire fleets, volcanic eruptions spewing ash into flight paths. On a normal winter day, even a bad one, you might see several hundred cancellations nationwide. This storm has driven cancellations into the thousands. Every major carrier has been affected. Every significant airport in the storm's path has been impacted. The cascading nature of flight operations means that cancellations in Dallas affect flights scheduled to leave from Seattle. Cancellations in Chicago ripple across the entire national network. Pilots and flight attendants stranded in the wrong cities can't crew flights elsewhere. Aircraft sitting on snow-covered ramps in Kansas City can't operate the route to Los Angeles. The entire system, which operates on carefully orchestrated schedules and precisely managed logistics, has been thrown into chaos by conditions that make flying either impossible or unsafe to attempt. Power outages are measured in the hundreds of thousands. At peak, the number without power exceeded 230,000, and remember, each customer represents a household or business, meaning the actual number of people sitting in cold and darkness is far higher. Some of those outages are in urban areas where crews can reach damaged infrastructure relatively quickly, but many are in rural areas where just getting to the problem takes hours, where repair crews are battling the same road conditions that are keeping everyone else home. And many of these outages are being caused by ice, which is particularly difficult to address. When ice brings down a power line, it doesn't just snap the line, it often damages poles, breaks insulators, pulls down entire sections of the distribution network. Repairs aren't quick fixes. They're rebuild operations that take time even in good weather, and these crews are working in decidedly bad weather. Ice accumulation totals in some locations are among the highest on record for those cities. We're talking about ice thick enough to be measured in inches rather than fractions of inches. In weather terms, just a quarter-inch of ice is enough to cause problems. Half an inch is considered a significant ice storm. Anything over an inch is catastrophic. Some locations are reporting significant ice accumulations, with reports of up to an inch in the hardest hit areas. At those thicknesses, tree limbs don't just bend, they break. Power lines don't just sag, they snap. Roads don't just become slippery, they become sheets of ice where friction is severely reduced. Where vehicles struggle to maintain control even with skilled drivers and capable vehicles. Snowfall totals are reaching levels that bury vehicles, that make simply opening a door difficult, that create depths where walking becomes exhausting. Chicago is measuring significant snowfall, with totals exceeding a foot in the hardest hit areas. Portions of Iowa and Missouri are seeing significant accumulations, with reports of over a foot of snow in some areas. Even locations that see significant snow most winters are admitting that this storm ranks among their worst. And it's not just the total accumulation, but the rate snow falling so fast that even continuous ploughing can't keep roads clear, that buries a freshly ploughed street within hours. Temperature records are falling alongside the precipitation records. The cold air mass driving this storm isn't just cold, it's exceptionally cold. Dangerously cold. Wind chills in some locations are dropping into ranges where frostbite can occur within minutes of exposure, where being outside without proper protection is genuinely dangerous. These aren't just uncomfortable temperatures. They're temperatures that create serious health risks if people aren't careful, that create risks beyond the immediate storm impacts. Someone stranded in a car during this storm isn't just inconvenienced, they're in potential danger if they can't stay warm, if their fuel runs out, if they make the mistake of trying to walk for help in conditions where visibility is near zero and temperatures are dangerous. Emergency declarations in 18 states represent a collective acknowledgement that this storm exceeds normal capacity to respond. Each of those declarations comes with legal and operational implications, the ability to spend emergency funds, to mobilize resources, to request federal assistance if needed, to suspend regulations that might slow response efforts. When nearly 1 in 3 states declares an emergency simultaneously because of the same weather system, it illustrates a level of national impact that's extraordinarily rare. Hurricanes typically affect a few states. Tornadoes strike locally. Earthquakes impact specific regions. To see winter weather triggering emergency declarations across 18 states shows an event that's operating on a different scale entirely. These numbers matter because they're not abstract. Behind every cancelled flight is a person trying to get somewhere home, to family, to a hospital for treatment, to a funeral, to a wedding. Behind every power outage number is a household making difficult choices about how to stay warm, whether to stay or seek shelter, how to manage medications that need refrigeration, how to keep children comfortable. Behind every ice accumulation measurement is a community watching trees they've lived with for decades break and fall, power lines that provide essential service snap and go dark, roads that connect them to the outside world become impassable. Behind every temperature record is the very real danger of exposure, the increased demand on heating systems, the strain on resources as people try to stay warm. What these numbers collectively demonstrate is that this storm isn't being called historic as hyperbole or exaggeration. It's historic because it's breaking records that in some cases have stood for decades. It's historic because it's creating impacts across such a vast area that the percentage of Americans directly affected is extraordinary. It's historic because years from now, when people look back at winter weather events of the early century, this storm will be among those discussed, analysed, remembered. The data supports that conclusion. The measurements prove it. The records broken validate it. But as meaningful as these numbers are, they still don't capture the full reality of what this storm means to the people living through it. Numbers tell us how many are without power. They don't tell us what that feels like, what choices families are making, what struggles they're facing. Numbers tell us how much snow fell. They don't tell us about the elderly resident who can't shovel, the single parent trying to manage children with no school and no ability to get to work, the first responder leaving family to help strangers. To understand the real impact of this storm, we have to move beyond the measurements and into the human dimension, into the stories of what it actually means to live through weather like this. Behind every number, every measurement, every record is a person, a family, a community. The human impact of this storm is where statistics transform into stories, where data becomes lived experience, where the historic nature of this event shifts from abstract to deeply personal. Think about the travellers stranded at airports, not just delayed stranded. Thousands of people who are supposed to be somewhere else right now, who made plans, who had obligations, who are instead stuck in terminals that have become temporary shelters. Some have been there for days, sleeping in chairs, rationing money for overpriced airport food, checking flight status boards that keep showing cancellations, parents with young children trying to keep little ones entertained and comfortable in an environment that wasn't designed for extended stays, elderly travellers worried about medications, about getting home to pets, about appointments they're missing, business travellers watching important meetings disappear, and perhaps most heartbreaking, people who are travelling for once-in-a-lifetime events, funerals they'll now miss, weddings they can't attend, final visits with sick relatives that won't happen. The storm doesn't care about human plans. It doesn't account for the importance of where you are trying to go. It simply makes getting there extremely difficult. Consider the families without power. Right now, this moment, hundreds of thousands of homes sitting in darkness as evening arrives. In summer, a power outage is an inconvenience. In winter, during a storm like this, it's a crisis. Houses lose heat quickly once the furnace stops running. Temperatures inside drop hour by hour. Families gather in one room, trying to conserve body heat. They pile on blankets. They debate whether to run a car in the garage for warmth, a dangerous choice that leads to carbon monoxide poisoning incidents every winter. Indoor temperatures can drop significantly when heating systems fail. Elderly residents face genuine danger. Older bodies don't regulate temperature as well, and dangerous cold becomes a concern even indoors. Those on medical equipment face even more dire situations. Medical equipment like oxygen concentrators and CPAP machines require power to function. When the lights go out during a storm like this, it's not just an inconvenience. For some, it creates serious concerns requiring difficult decisions about whether to try to reach a hospital through impassable roads or hope power returns before the situation becomes critical. First responders are working through conditions that make every call dangerous. Police officers responding to accidents on ice-covered highways risk becoming victims themselves. Firefighters trying to reach structure fires find roads blocked by snow or ice, find water lines frozen, find equipment that doesn't function well in extreme cold. EMTs and paramedics transport patients to hospitals through blizzard conditions where normal 5-minute trips take an hour or more if they can complete them at all. And all of these first responders are making an impossible choice every time they go out, leaving their own families at home during this severe storm to help strangers in crisis. They don't get to stay safe and warm. They don't get to wait it out. They respond because that's what they do, because someone needs help, because the job demands it, even when conditions are extremely challenging. Essential workers beyond first responders are also out in this. Utility crews trying to restore power, working in bucket trucks in ice and wind, touching frozen equipment with frozen hands, doing hazardous work in challenging conditions because millions need power restored. Snowplow operators running shifts, watching the same roads they cleared hours ago drift shut again, dealing with the repetitive exhaustion of work that never seems to finish. Grocery store employees who made it to work so that others can buy supplies, standing behind registers in stores that might be cold because power is intermittent, dealing with crowds of stressed customers, working long hours because co-workers couldn't make it in, healthcare workers at hospitals and nursing homes who are sleeping at their workplaces because travelling home and back is impossible, pulling double and triple shifts because the patients still need care and there's no one else to provide it. Think about the elderly and vulnerable populations who are always most at risk during events like this. The senior citizen living alone whose neighbour usually checks on them, but that neighbour can't get their car out of the driveway. The disabled resident who relies on regular home health visits that aren't coming because the visiting nurse can't navigate the roads. The person with dementia who doesn't understand why it's suddenly so cold, why the lights won't turn on, who might wander outside into dangerous conditions because they're confused. Communities are trying to check on these vulnerable residents, but the same conditions that make checking necessary also make checking difficult or impossible. Schools are closed across the storm's entire path, not surprising, but that closure creates cascades of challenge. Parents who work outside the home have to find childcare or miss work. Single parents face impossible choices between earning needed income and leaving children alone. Children who rely on school meals go without that nutrition. Parents stress about kids falling behind academically, about how long closures might last, about whether they'll need to be made up later in the year. And for children themselves, especially young ones, being trapped inside during a storm that makes even playing outside dangerous creates restlessness and stress that parents somehow have to manage. But amid all this hardship, there's something else happening too. There are also stories of remarkable kindness, of communities pulling together, of the better parts of human nature emerging under pressure. Neighbours checking on neighbours despite the difficulty. Someone with a working fireplace inviting the family next door without power to stay warm. Strangers pulling stranded motorists from ditches. Residents with four-wheel drive vehicles volunteering to transport medical personnel to hospitals. Churches and community centres opening as warming shelters. Local restaurants that still have power cooking food to distribute to those without. Teenagers organising to shovel driveways for elderly neighbours. Communities creating social media groups to coordinate who needs help and who can provide it. One story that's emerged from Texas tells of a man who walked house to house in his neighbourhood during the ice storm, checking on every elderly resident, making sure each had food and warmth, helping arrange for those without power to reach warming centres. He spent hours in challenging conditions doing something he didn't have to do because he knew his neighbours might need help. That story is being repeated in different forms across this storm's entire path, ordinary people doing extraordinary things because someone needs help and they can provide it. Another story from the Midwest describes a stranded motorist who was rescued by a snowplow operator who wasn't supposed to stop, who was supposed to stay en route clearing roads, but who saw the car buried in a drift and couldn't leave someone in danger. The operator called in the rescue, waited with the motorist until help arrived, then went back to ploughing, just doing what needed doing, no fanfare, no expectation of recognition, just human decency in action. Emergency shelters are full of volunteers working long hours, cooking meals, organising supplies, helping families get settled, keeping children entertained, providing comfort where possible. These volunteers aren't trained disaster response professionals in most cases. They're community members who showed up because they could help, because others needed help, because this is what neighbours do. The human impact of this storm is both heartbreaking and inspiring. It's families struggling in cold and darkness, and it's communities rallying to help those families. It's travellers missing once-in-a-lifetime events, and it's airport workers going above and beyond to make stranded passengers more comfortable. It's first responders putting themselves at risk, and it's citizens expressing gratitude for their sacrifice. It's vulnerable populations facing genuine danger, and its neighbours refusing to let those populations face that danger alone. This is what winter storms do. They reveal vulnerability in infrastructure, in systems, in our preparations, but they also reveal strength in communities, in individuals, in the basic human impulse to help others when times are hard. The numbers tell us this storm is historic. The human stories tell us why that matters. Because history isn't just data and measurements. History is lived by people. And right now, millions of people are living through a storm they'll remember for the rest of their lives. A storm that's testing them, challenging them, and in many cases, showing them both how difficult life can be and how good people can be when others need help. What makes these human stories even more powerful is recognizing that while the experiences are universal cold, hardship, resilience, kindness, the specific nature of those experiences varies dramatically depending on where you are in this storm's vast footprint. The challenges facing someone in Dallas are different from those facing someone in Chicago, even though both are caught in the same storm system. Understanding those regional differences reveals why this storm is impacting so many people in so many different ways. This storm's geographic scope means it's creating very different challenges in different regions, and understanding those differences helps explain why this single weather system is overwhelming such a vast area. Each region hit by this storm faces unique vulnerabilities, and the storm has managed to exploit nearly all of them simultaneously. The South is experiencing perhaps the most dramatic departure from normal. From Texas through Louisiana, Arkansas, and into Tennessee and northern Mississippi, this storm has brought ice in quantities these regions simply aren't equipped to handle. Dallas, a city of millions, has fewer snowplows and salt trucks than a small town in Minnesota, because Dallas rarely needs them. The state's entire winter weather response infrastructure is built around the reality that major ice storms come along once every several years, not every winter. When they do come, the plan is essentially to shut down and wait them out, because fighting them isn't practical given the limited equipment available. But this ice storm is so extensive, so long-lasting, that simply waiting isn't working. People are running low on supplies. Businesses can't stay closed indefinitely. And the ice isn't melting, because temperatures aren't rising. The cold air behind this storm is keeping conditions frozen even as the precipitation ends. The power grid in Texas is facing scrutiny again, echoes of the severe February 2021 freeze. While this storm isn't as cold as that event was, the ice is creating different challenges. Ice-weighted lines are sagging, snapping, pulling down entire sections of distribution network. In northern states, more power lines are buried underground specifically because ice and snow cause these problems. In Texas, the climate doesn't justify that expense for most lines, so they remain above ground and vulnerable. Utility crews are working to restore power, but they're working with equipment that's stretched thin, with experience that's less deep than crews in regions that handle this every winter, with a population that's concerned given their experience with the February 2021 event. The lack of preparation isn't a failure, it's economics. You don't build infrastructure for events that might happen once every several decades. You don't maintain equipment and expertise for scenarios that are rare. Texas made reasonable decisions based on typical weather patterns. This storm is exceptionally severe. And so Texas is paying the price of being hit with conditions it had no reasonable expectation of needing to handle regularly. The same is true across the South. Louisiana doesn't have the winter maintenance budgets that Illinois has. Arkansas doesn't have the ploughing capacity of Wisconsin. They have what their typical winters require, and this storm is so far beyond that requirement that it's revealing vulnerabilities no one could reasonably have prevented. Move to the Midwest and Great Plains, and you find a different story. These states expect winter. They budget for it. They have the equipment and expertise to manage heavy snow and cold, and yet this storm is overwhelming even their substantial capabilities. Kansas and Missouri are dealing with snow accumulations that exceed what their fleets can handle quickly. They can clear roads, but not all roads simultaneously, and the rate of snowfall combined with drifting means roads don't stay clear. Rural areas in Iowa are cut off not because no one knows how to plough, but because the conditions make ploughing some areas impossible until wind dies down. You can't clear a road that drifts shut 10 minutes after you finish. The cold accompanying this snow is also exceptional. Kansas is no stranger to cold winters, but wind chills dropping into ranges where exposed skin freezes in minutes create dangers beyond just the snow. Farmers checking on livestock risk frostbite. Vehicles stranded on rural roads become potential death traps if occupants don't have proper cold weather gear. Schools closed, not just because roads are bad, but because temperatures are too cold to safely have children walking to bus stops or waiting outside. What makes the Midwest impact so significant despite their preparedness is the sheer magnitude of what they're being asked to handle. Imagine being equipped to handle a foot of snow over several days, a major event but manageable, and instead getting 2 feet in 36 hours with winds creating drifts to 4 or 5 feet. You're equipped, but you're not equipped for this. It's the difference between being ready for a rainstorm and being ready for a flood. The same basic category, but a scale that overwhelms capacity. The Ohio Valley is experiencing a particularly nasty combination ice in southern portions, heavy snow in northern portions, and a narrow band where both are happening simultaneously. Kentucky's northern counties are dealing with significant ice, while the southern part of the state has primarily snow. This creates resource allocation nightmares for emergency management. Do you send equipment south to handle ice or north to handle snow? How do you split limited resources across 2 different types of winter emergencies? Ohio faces similar challenges, with Cleveland and the northern areas buried under lake effect enhanced snow while Cincinnati and the south deal with ice. Indiana is split down the middle. These states have good winter response systems, but those systems are built on the assumption that one type of winter weather hits at a time across a coherent region. This storm is hitting with multiple types simultaneously across subdivided areas, creating logistical complexity that even good systems struggle to address. The Mid-Atlantic and Northeast are being hammered by what amounts to a nor'easter, a storm type they know well, but that still shuts down the region when it arrives with this intensity. Philadelphia, New York, Boston, these cities have seen countless winter storms. They know how to respond. But this storm's intensity, combined with its duration, is creating impacts that accumulate beyond what typical response can handle. New York City has a massive snow removal budget and fleet, but even they can only clear so much so fast when snow is falling at rates of 2 or 3 inches per hour. Boston is dealing with snowfall totals that rank among the highest for late January in their records. The coastal component adds flooding concerns Jersey Shore communities are sandbagging against storm surge even as snow falls inland. Delaware is managing both snow and ice depending on proximity to the coast. Maryland's mountains are buried while Baltimore deals with ice. Population density in the Northeast means even moderate snow creates enormous disruption simply because so many people are affected. When you have millions of people per square mile all trying to function during a winter storm, the math gets overwhelming fast. Mass transit struggles, trains can't run on snow-covered tracks, buses can't navigate unploughed streets, and when mass transit fails in a region where many people don't own cars because they rely on mass transit, you've created a mobility crisis that goes beyond just road closures. People can't get to work even if their workplace is open. Medical appointments get missed. Supply chains falter because delivery drivers can't reach destinations. What's remarkable about these regional differences is that this storm has managed to create a worst-case scenario for each region based on that region's specific vulnerabilities. The South gets ice, which it's least equipped to handle. The Midwest gets extreme accumulations and cold that overwhelm even good systems. The Ohio Valley gets a complex mix that splits resources. The Northeast gets intensity and duration that outpace even sophisticated response capabilities. It's as if this storm studied each region and determined precisely what would be most difficult for that area to manage, then delivered exactly that. And across all regions, there's a common thread this storm is exposing infrastructure vulnerabilities that modern life normally masks. We live in a society that's incredibly reliant on systems working seamlessly. We expect electricity to flow constantly. We expect roads to be passable. We expect supply chains to deliver goods reliably. We expect communication networks to keep us connected. These expectations are reasonable because most of the time these systems do work. But they work because conditions remain within parameters those systems were designed to handle. This storm is pushing conditions outside those parameters across half the country simultaneously. And the cracks are showing. Power grids designed for typical demand are straining under heating loads during extreme cold. Road networks designed for typical winter weather can't keep up with extreme snowfall or ice. Supply chains optimized for just-in-time delivery fail when delivery trucks can't move. Communication networks experience outages as cell towers lose power or backhaul connections fail. The complexity and interdependence of modern infrastructure is normally a strength. Everything connects, everything supports everything else. But when a shock this large hits the system, that interdependence means failures cascade. Power outages disable communications. Transportation failures stop supply deliveries. Each system supports others, so when one fails, others follow. What this storm is revealing is both how sophisticated our infrastructure has become, and how vulnerable that sophistication makes us when extreme events occur. A century ago, winter storms didn't cause power outages because most places didn't have electricity. They didn't disrupt supply chains because supply chains were local. They didn't cancel flights because flights didn't exist. Modern life has brought incredible benefits, but it's also created dependencies that become obvious when systems fail. This storm is making those dependencies impossible to ignore, highlighting just how much we rely on infrastructure that most of us never think about until it stops working. And that infrastructure challenge extends beyond physical systems into the human systems, the utility workers, the plough drivers, the emergency responders, the repair crews. These are the people who maintain the infrastructure we depend on, and they're being pushed to limits that reveal both the impressive capacity of response systems and the breaking points where capacity gets overwhelmed. Understanding the infrastructure challenge more deeply shows why recovery from this storm will take time, why simply waiting for snow to stop falling isn't the end of the event, why communities will be dealing with impacts for days, and in some cases weeks after conditions improve. When we flip a light switch, we expect the light to come on. When we turn on a faucet, we expect water. When we get in a car, we expect roads to be passable. These expectations feel reasonable because infrastructure normally works so reliably that we rarely think about it. This storm is forcing millions of Americans to think about infrastructure in ways they usually don't, to confront the reality of how complex and how fragile the systems supporting modern life actually are. Power grids are taking a beating across the storm's path. The grid is a marvel of engineering, a vast interconnected system that balances generation and demand in real time, that routes power across thousands of miles, that normally operates with remarkable reliability. But that system is vulnerable to physical damage, and this storm is causing damage across a massive area. Ice-weighted power lines snap, poles break under the load, tree branches fall onto lines and create shorts that trigger protective systems to shut down entire sections. Each of these failures has to be found and fixed, and finding them during a storm when roads are impassable and visibility is poor takes time. Fixing them when crews are working in ice and freezing temperatures takes longer. And the sheer number of simultaneous failures across so many states means repair crews are stretched impossibly thin. Utility companies bring in mutual aid crews from other regions during major events, a practice that works well when one area is hit and surrounding areas can send help. But when the storm covers half the country, where do mutual aid crews come from? The utilities that would normally send workers to Texas are dealing with their own outages in Oklahoma or Missouri. The crews that would normally help Kansas are buried in Illinois. This storm's scale means the normal mutual aid system is strained, meaning local crews are handling larger workloads with less backup than usual, and the cold creates challenges beyond just the damage itself. Equipment doesn't work as well in extreme cold. Batteries drain faster, diesel fuel gels and clogs lines. Hydraulic systems become sluggish. Workers can only stay outside for limited periods before they have to warm up to avoid frostbite. All of this slows repair work, meaning outages that might normally be fixed in hours take days. The utility crews working through this are doing heroic work, spending long shifts in miserable conditions, often sleeping in trucks or temporary facilities because going home isn't practical, missing time with their own families to restore power to strangers' families. And they're doing this with the knowledge that each outage they're working to fix represents people in real need, families in cold houses, vulnerable residents at risk, communities unable to function normally. Road networks are similarly overwhelmed. State departments of transportation have plans for winter weather. They have ploughs and salt trucks and trained operators. They have priority systems into states and major highways first, then state routes, then local roads. These plans work well for typical winter events. But this storm's intensity is creating accumulation rates that make keeping roads clear nearly impossible. A plough can clear a highway, but if snow is falling fast enough, or wind is creating drifts fast enough, that same highway is snow-covered again within hours. The work becomes repetitive and endless, clear the same roads again and again, never quite getting ahead of conditions. Salt supplies are running low in some areas. Salt is stockpiled before winter, but stockpiles are based on typical seasonal use. No one budgets salt based on worst-case scenarios because the storage costs would be prohibitive. When a storm this large hits, salt gets used up fast, and resupply becomes challenging when the same storm that created the need also makes delivery difficult. Some jurisdictions are rationing salt, using it only on high-priority routes, letting other roads remain snowpacked because there's no alternative. Sand helps provide traction, but doesn't melt ice the way salt does. In ice storm areas, roads remain dangerous because sand can't address the underlying problem. Plough operators are exhausted. These workers pull long shifts during any winter event. But this storm's duration means they've been working essentially non-stop for days. Fatigue becomes a safety issue, tired operators make mistakes, reaction times slow, judgment suffers. But there's no one to relieve them because every operator is already working. Departments have to balance the need to keep roads clear against the reality that operators need rest to work safely. Transportation hubs, airports, train stations, bus terminals are paralysed not just by weather conditions at their locations, but by the storm's scale disrupting the entire network. An airport might be ready to resume operations, but the aircraft that's supposed to operate the next flight is stuck in another city that's still buried. Crews can't reach the airport to work flights even if planes were available. The hub-and-spoke system that makes modern transportation efficient also makes it vulnerable to widespread disruptions. When multiple hubs are down simultaneously, the entire network grinds to a halt. Supply chains are revealing their fragility. Just-in-time delivery systems minimize inventory costs, but require reliable transportation. When trucks can't move, stores run out of milk and bread and other staples quickly because there's no deep inventory to draw from. Warehouses that would normally resupply stores are themselves cut off or dealing with staffing shortages because workers can't get to work. Distribution centres are backlogged. Even after roads are cleared, it will take days for supply chains to catch up with delayed deliveries and replenish depleted store inventories. Water systems face multiple challenges. Treatment plants need power to operate when power goes out. Backup generators kick in, but those generators need fuel, and fuel delivery might be disrupted by road conditions. Frozen pipes are a concern during extreme cold both in distribution systems and in individual homes. Water main breaks increase during freezer-thaw cycles. Boil water advisories get issued when pressure drops or contamination risks arise. Something as basic as clean running water becomes uncertain during events like this, revealing yet another dependency most people never think about. Communication networks are stressed. Cell towers need power when commercial power fails. They switch to backup batteries, which last for a limited time before the tower goes offline, unless generators can be brought in or power restored. Internet service relies on physical infrastructure that's vulnerable to the same ice and snow-damaging power lines. When communication systems fail, coordination of emergency response becomes harder, people can't check on loved ones, information doesn't flow as it should. In a crisis, communication is crucial, and this storm is disrupting it in many areas. Natural gas delivery systems are under strain from heating demand. Furnaces across the affected region are running constantly trying to keep homes warm in extreme cold. This drives natural gas consumption to peak levels. The system can handle typical winter demand, but when half the country is simultaneously running heating systems at maximum, supply becomes tight. Prices spike in wholesale markets. Utilities monitor pressure in pipelines to ensure safe operations. In extreme cases, some large industrial users might be asked to reduce consumption to ensure residential users maintain service. The system is designed with redundancy, but this storm is testing those margins. What all of these infrastructure challenges illustrate is the complexity of modern life. We live surrounded by systems that work so well most of the time that we forget they exist. We expect electricity, running water, clear roads, stocked stores, working communications. These expectations are met by intricate systems requiring constant maintenance and operation. Systems with limited buffers for extreme conditions. Systems dependent on workers being able to reach job sites and perform tasks that can't always be done remotely. When a storm of this magnitude hits, every one of those systems is stressed simultaneously, and the cumulative effect is a level of disruption that wouldn't occur if only one system failed, but becomes overwhelming when multiple systems fail together. Infrastructure will be repaired, roads will be cleared, power will be restored, supply chains will catch up, but the process takes time, requires enormous effort from thousands of workers, and reveals vulnerabilities that are uncomfortable to acknowledge. We live in a society that's simultaneously more capable than at any point in history, and more dependent on that capability continuing uninterrupted. This storm is interrupting it across half the country, and the response to that interruption shows both impressive resilience from infrastructure systems and the limits of what those systems can handle when pushed to extremes. But while infrastructure systems struggle, human systems are responding in ways that infrastructure cannot with flexibility, improvisation, compassion, and community spirit. The official response to this storm has been substantial, but the community response has been equally important, showing that when systems fail, people step in to help each other through, revealing the best of human nature under pressure. Official emergency response is crucial during events like this: government resources, trained personnel, coordinated operations. But often what makes the difference between crisis and catastrophe is community response, neighbours helping neighbours, volunteers stepping up, ordinary people doing extraordinary things because someone needs help and they can provide it. Warming centres have opened across the storm's entire path. In Texas, churches and community centres are providing heated spaces for those without power at home. In Missouri, schools are opening their doors as shelters, even though classes are cancelled. In Pennsylvania, fire stations are serving as gathering points where people can warm up, charge phones, get information. These warming centres are staffed largely by volunteers, community members who are donating their time because others need help. They're preparing meals, organising donations of blankets and coats, helping families with children find activities to pass time, checking on elderly visitors to ensure they're staying warm and healthy. No one is paying these volunteers. No one is requiring them to be there. They're showing up because their communities need them. Neighbour networks are forming organically. In subdivisions across the affected region, people are checking on each other. Someone with a generator is running an extension cord to the neighbour without power. A family with a working fireplace invites the family next door to bring sleeping bags and spend the night where it's warm. Neighbours with four-wheel drive vehicles are offering to make supply runs for those who can't get their cars out of driveways. These aren't organised relief efforts with official coordination. They're just people being decent, recognising that their neighbours are struggling and doing what they can to help. In Iowa, farmers are checking not just on their own livestock, but on neighbouring farms, making sure that elderly farmers who might struggle in these conditions have help. In Ohio, apartment building residents are pooling resources, those with food sharing with those whose supplies ran low, those with working heat taking in those whose units are cold. In Arkansas, someone started a Facebook group to coordinate local assistance, and within hours it had thousands of members, people offering help, people requesting help, a community organising itself because official channels were overwhelmed. Stories of stranger kindness are emerging from across the storm's footprint. A stranded motorist in Kansas reports that 3 different vehicles stopped to offer assistance before a tow truck could reach her people, putting themselves at risk on dangerous roads to help someone they didn't know. A family stuck at a closed airport in Dallas was offered a place to stay by someone who saw their situation and simply handed them a key to an empty rental property they owned. A man in Chicago who was shoveling his own driveway saw an elderly woman trying to clear her walk and spent the next 3 hours clearing her driveway and walks without being asked, then moved on to help 2 more neighbours before going inside. These stories aren't isolated incidents. They're being repeated constantly across every state in this storm's path. Volunteers are shoveling sidewalks for senior citizens. Businesses with power are offering free charging stations for phones and devices. Restaurants that manage to open are donating meals to warming centres. Hotels are reducing rates for stranded travellers, or in some cases offering free rooms to those with nowhere else to go. Pharmacies are working with customers who can't reach their locations to arrange medication deliveries. Veterinarians are taking in pets whose owners are without power and worried about keeping animals warm. Youth are getting involved in impressive ways. High school students in suburban Chicago organised a snow shoveling brigade, going door to door offering to clear driveways and walks for free for elderly residents. College students stuck on campus in Pennsylvania instead of being home for break, have volunteered at local shelters, helping serve meals and organise supplies. Boy Scout troops in Missouri are collecting and distributing firewood to families with fireplaces but no wood supply. These young people are learning lessons about community and service that will shape them for life, and they're making real differences for people struggling through this storm. Emergency responders beyond the traditional first responders are proving essential. Volunteer fire departments across rural areas of the Midwest are operating with members who are farmers and tradespeople and small business owners, people who aren't professional firefighters, but who serve their communities when needed. These volunteers are responding to calls in the same dangerous conditions that career firefighters face, but they're doing it without pay, purely out of commitment to community. Search and rescue teams are working to locate and assist stranded motorists. Amateur radio operators are providing backup communications when cell service fails. Ham radio networks are passing health and welfare messages, checking on isolated residents, coordinating resource requests. Faith communities are mobilising resources. Churches are organising meal deliveries to homebound residents. Synagogues are coordinating volunteers to check on elderly members. Mosques are opening spaces as community gathering points. These religious organisations are serving everyone, not just their own members, recognising that crisis doesn't discriminate, and neither should assistance. The infrastructure of religious community buildings, communication networks, organised volunteers is proving valuable for disaster response in ways that go beyond spiritual support to practical help. Local businesses are contributing in ways both big and small. Hardware stores are staying open longer hours despite difficult conditions so people can buy supplies they need. Grocery stores are limiting purchases of high-demand items to prevent hoarding and ensure more people can get basic supplies. Gas stations are working to keep pumps operational and tanks filled. Towing services are operating non-stop, pulling vehicles from ditches and jump-starting dead batteries. These businesses are operating under difficult conditions, with staff shortages because employees can't get to work, with supply challenges, with uncertain revenue, but they're staying open because their communities need them. Social media is proving to be a valuable coordination tool, despite its often criticised downsides. Local community groups on Facebook and Nextdoor are becoming clearinghouses for information: who needs help, who can offer help, what resources are available, what roads are passable. People are posting offers. I have a generator and extension cord if anyone nearby needs power for medical equipment. I have four-wheel drive and can make emergency supply runs. I have space in my home for anyone without heat. And others are posting needs. Elderly parent needs medication pickup. Family with infant needs shelter. Stranded motorist needs assistance at this location. The community is organising itself through these platforms in real time, creating informal but effective mutual aid networks. What all of this community response demonstrates is resilience, not infrastructure resilience, but human resilience. Systems can fail. Infrastructure can be overwhelmed. But communities endure when people choose to help each other, when individuals decide that their neighbours' struggle matters, when strangers extend kindness without expectation of reward or recognition. This storm is bringing out the worst in conditions, but the best in many people. That pattern isn't new, it's repeated through every disaster, every crisis, every moment when normal life is disrupted, and people have to choose how to respond. And time after time, most people choose to help. This kind of community response can't replace organised emergency management. It can't restore power or clear highways or repair infrastructure, but it can make the difference between someone suffering alone and someone knowing their community cares. It can mean the difference between a vulnerable person in genuine danger and that same person safe and warm. It can transform a frightening experience into a story of human goodness, a memory that's difficult but also inspiring. The infrastructure will be fixed by professionals with equipment and expertise, but the human cost of this storm is being reduced by ordinary people doing simple things, checking on neighbours, sharing resources, offering help, choosing kindness when they could choose indifference. These stories of community response are important not just because they're uplifting, but because they're instructive. They remind us that while we depend on complex systems and infrastructure, we also depend on each other. They show that capacity for mutual aid and community support isn't something from the past that modern life has made obsolete. It's still there, still powerful, still crucial when crisis comes. And they validate the truth that infrastructure makes life easier, but community makes life possible, especially when infrastructure fails. This combination infrastructure challenge and community response has played out before in American history. Winter storms have always tested this country, have always revealed both vulnerability and resilience. Understanding how this storm fits into that broader historical pattern helps contextualize what we're experiencing, helps us understand that while this storm is remarkable, the pattern of Americans facing winter challenges and finding ways through them is deeply familiar. If you're over the age of 65 watching this, you've lived through memorable winters before. You have your own reference points for cold and snow and difficult conditions. And part of what makes this storm so striking is how it compares to those memories, how it fits into the longer pattern of American winters that have tested communities and been remembered for generations. The winter of 77 through 78 is still talked about across the Midwest and Northeast. That winter was brutal record cold, heavy snow that started in November and didn't really stop until March, frozen waterways that didn't thaw until late spring. Buffalo was buried multiple times. Ohio faced snowfall totals that accumulated over months into staggering seasonal numbers. The cold was relentless week after week of temperatures that didn't moderate, that kept everything frozen solid. People who lived through that winter remember what it was like, the exhaustion of constant snow removal, the strain on heating systems and fuel supplies, the way winter just wouldn't end. That winter became a benchmark, a reference point for bad winters. When people want to convey how tough a winter is, they compare it to 77 through 78. This storm isn't that winter no single storm could be, but in terms of intensity over a short period, in terms of the breadth of area affected simultaneously, this storm is creating impacts that rival what communities experienced during the worst weeks of that winter. The difference is compression what that winter did over months. This storm is doing in days. The accumulation totals in some locations are approaching what fell during major events in that winter. The cold is comparable. The disruption is similar. If you lived through 77 through 78, you have context for what's happening now. And that context tells you this storm deserves to be taken seriously. The blizzard of 93 is another reference point, particularly in the southeast and mid-Atlantic. That storm, which came in March, hit with shocking intensity across a region that stretches from Alabama to Maine. It brought snow to places that rarely see snow, created genuine blizzard conditions across Appalachia, shut down entire states. People remember being snowbound for days, remember the way a single storm paralyzed such a huge region. That storm earned the nickname Storm of the Century in some areas, and decades later, people still reference it as the standard for major winter events. This current storm is hitting a similar geographic range, that Texas to Maine corridor, that breadth across multiple states and climate zones. The 93 storm was remarkable for affecting so much of the East Coast simultaneously. This storm is affecting even more area, stretching farther west into the Plains and Rockies. The snow totals in this storm's hardest hit areas are comparable to what 93 produced. The duration is similar, multiple days of continuous winter weather, creating cumulative impacts. If you remember the blizzard of 93, you recognise the same pattern, a massive system creating widespread impacts. The sense that nowhere in a huge region is escaping this. The understanding that this is a storm that will be remembered. January 94 brought back-to-back ice storms that crippled portions of the South and Mid-South. Those storms coated everything in ice, brought down massive numbers of trees, left hundreds of thousands without power for extended periods. The images from that event, ice-coated forests, trees bent to breaking, power lines down everywhere, are etched in the memories of those who experienced it. Recovery took weeks in some areas. The damage was extensive and expensive. That event became the reference point for ice storms across that region. This current storm is creating similar ice impacts across an even broader area. The same states that were hit in '94 are being hit again, but the geographic scope extends farther. The ice accumulation totals are comparable. The power outage numbers are similar. The tree damage is extensive. For people in those areas who remember '94, there's an uncomfortable familiarity to what they're seeing outside their windows right now. The same ice building up, the same branches breaking, the same power lines failing. The technology for responding has improved better communication, better coordination, better forecasting. But ice is still ice, and it still causes the same fundamental problems it caused 3 decades ago. The polar vortex events of 2014 brought extreme cold to much of the country, particularly the Midwest and East. Those events were notable less for snow than for temperature dangerous cold that strained infrastructure and created hazards simply from exposure. The term polar vortex entered public vocabulary during that time, used to describe the weather pattern that brought Arctic air so far south. People remember those temperatures, remember the warnings not to go outside, remember the stress on power grids and heating systems. This storm combines that kind of cold with heavy precipitation. The temperature component of this storm rivals the polar vortex event's wind chills at dangerous levels, cold that makes even the storm response work hazardous for crews. But this storm adds snow and ice on top of that cold, creating a more complex and more dangerous situation. You had to deal with cold in 2014. Now communities have to deal with cold plus snow, or cold plus ice, or cold plus both. The compound nature of the threats makes this storm in some ways more challenging than those earlier cold events. What makes this storm historic in its own right, beyond just comparisons to past events, is the combination of factors: the geographic scope matching or exceeding the blizzard of '93, the ice impacts comparable to January 1984, the cold rivaling the polar vortex, the duration similar, to major events from the '77 through '78 winter. It's taking the worst aspects of several historic winter events and delivering them simultaneously across half the country. That combination is what makes meteorologists use words like unprecedented and historic. No single aspect of this storm is completely beyond anything ever recorded, but the combination of all aspects happening at once is extraordinarily rare. Technology has changed how we experience and respond to winter storms since many of these historic events occurred. In '77 through '78, weather forecasting was far less precise than today. Storm predictions were less accurate. Warnings were less specific. People had less advance notice and less detailed information about what was coming. Today, this storm was forecast days in advance. Computer models predicted its track and intensity with impressive accuracy. Warnings were issued early, giving communities and individuals time to prepare. That improved forecasting has undoubtedly saved lives and reduced suffering. People had time to stock supplies, to make plans, to decide whether to shelter in place or evacuate before the storm hit. But technology hasn't changed the fundamental nature of winter weather. Ice still brings down power lines regardless of how sophisticated our forecasting is. Snow still blocks roads whether we had 3 days warning or 3 hours. Cold still creates danger, despite our ability to predict it precisely. Better information helps, but it doesn't eliminate the hazards. It allows for better preparation and response, but it doesn't prevent the impacts. This storm was well forecast, and yet it's still creating massive disruption, because once winter weather of this intensity arrives, there's only so much that can be done to mitigate it. The historical perspective also reveals patterns in how Americans respond to winter challenges. Every major winter event in history has been met with the same basic response: official emergency efforts, community mutual aid, individual resilience, gradual recovery. The specific technologies change. We have better equipment now, better communication, more sophisticated systems. But the human elements remain constant. Neighbours helped neighbours during the blizzard of '93, just as they're helping now. First responders worked through dangerous conditions during the '77 through '78 winter, just as they're working now. Communities pulled together during the January 94 ice storms just as they're pulling together now. The constancy of that response pattern across decades and different events suggests something fundamental about how Americans deal with winter crises with practical effort, mutual support, and determination to get through to the other side. This storm will join that historical list. Years from now, people will reference that January 26 stormed the way they now reference the blizzard of 93 or the 77 through 78 winter. It will become part of the collective memory of what winter can do, part of the reference library of extreme weather events. Children who are experiencing this storm now will tell their own children and grandchildren about it someday. It will be a story that gets told where you were, what it was like, how you got through it. That's what historic storms do. They become part of personal and community narrative, markers of time, shared experiences that bind people together through the memory of facing something difficult. But while history helps us understand what we're experiencing, and provides context that this too shall pass, for people in the storm's path right now, the most pressing question isn't how this compares to past events. The most pressing question is simpler and more immediate: when will it end? And what comes next? Right now, at this moment, the storm is still active. Snow is still falling across portions of the Midwest and Northeast. Ice is still accumulating in some southern areas. Cold air is still gripping the entire region. But storms, even historic ones, don't last forever. This system will move on. Conditions will improve. Recovery will begin. Understanding that timeline when improvement comes, what recovery looks like, how long it takes, provides something that people dealing with this storm desperately need, which is hope grounded in reality. The storm's movement eastward means that western portions of the affected area are beginning to see conditions improve. Texas is transitioning from active ice accumulation to the cleanup and recovery phase. The precipitation has largely ended, though the ice remains and will remain until temperatures rise enough to melt it. That melting will take time, days in most areas. The cold air mass behind this storm is lingering, keeping temperatures at or below freezing, which means ice isn't going anywhere quickly. Roads will remain dangerous. Power restoration will continue, but at least the situation isn't actively getting worse anymore in those western areas. The storm has moved on, leaving behind its damage but not adding to it. The central portions of the storm track, the Midwest and Ohio Valley, are in the peak impact phase right now. Snow is still falling, wind is still blowing, conditions are at their worst. For communities in this zone, the next 24 to 48 hours will be the most challenging. Then the storm system will move east, and these areas will transition from active event to recovery phase. The snow will stop, wind will diminish, visibility will improve, temperatures will remain cold for several more days, but the acute danger will have passed. That transition from active storm to recovery is crucial. It's when travel becomes possible again, when crews can work more effectively, when normal life can begin returning. The eastern edge of the storm, the mid-Atlantic and northeast, is being hit now, and will continue experiencing impacts for another day or so. These areas are the last to be affected, but they're being affected just as severely as areas farther west were days ago. Snow totals are still climbing. Coastal impacts are ongoing. For residents in these areas, improvement is still a day or more away. They're in the thick of it right now, dealing with conditions that their western counterparts experienced earlier in the week. But the same pattern will hold. The storm will move off the coast. Conditions will improve. Recovery will begin. The forecast for the days following the storm's departure shows cold persisting across much of the affected region. This extended cold period has both positive and negative implications. The positive is that snow won't melt quickly into flooding. Areas that received heavy snow won't immediately face the secondary challenge of rapidly melting snow, overwhelming drainage systems and creating flood conditions. The snow will be around for a while, but it will be manageable snow, not an immediate new hazard. The negative is that cold delays recovery. Ice won't melt. Repairs are harder in extreme cold. People without power will continue suffering until electricity is restored, because temperatures won't moderate enough for homes to be tolerable without heat. The cold extends the duration of hardship even after the precipitation ends. Looking a week out, forecast models suggest a pattern change that will bring warmer air into the region. Not summer temperatures we're still in January, but temperatures above freezing. Temperatures that allow ice to melt, that make outdoor work less miserable, that reduce heating demands and stress on power grids. That warming will mark the beginning of the true recovery phase, when focus can shift from immediate crisis response to assessment and repair. That's when communities can start counting costs, repairing damage that couldn't be addressed during the storm, restoring full normal operations rather than emergency operations. Recovery timelines vary dramatically depending on location and the specific impacts experienced. Areas that received primarily snow will recover relatively quickly. Roads will be cleared, snow will be removed or will melt, life will return to normal within days of the storm ending. The disruption, while significant during the event, doesn't leave lasting damage. Snow melts, roads dry. Recovery is about clearing and waiting, not rebuilding. Areas that experience significant ice face longer recovery. Ice damage takes time to repair. Trees that snapped need to be removed, a process that can take weeks as crews work through backlogs. Power lines that came down need to be rebuilt, not just reconnected. Poles that broke need to be replaced. This work can't be rushed. It has to be done safely and correctly. For some locations where ice damage was extensive, full power restoration might take a week or more. That's a long time to be without power, a long time for families to struggle, a long time for communities to operate under emergency conditions. But utility crews will work steadily through the backlog, prioritising critical facilities, hospitals, water treatment plants, emergency services, then working through residential areas systematically. Infrastructure beyond power will also need recovery time. Roads that were torn up by ploughs scraping down to pavement will need repair come spring. Salt and sand will need to be replenished. Equipment that was run hard during the storm response will need maintenance. Supply chains will need days to catch up, to clear backlogs, to restock stores that were depleted. Even after roads are clear and conditions improve, it will take time for normal commerce to resume full operations. For individuals and families, recovery has its own timeline. Homes that suffered damage, roof collapses from snow load, pipes that froze and burst, trees that fell on structures will need repairs that take weeks or months. Insurance claims need to be filed and processed. Contractors need to be scheduled, and they'll be busy because many homes will need similar repairs. The financial costs of this storm will be tallied for months as repair bills come in, as insurance settlements are negotiated, as the full scope of damage becomes clear. But recovery happens. Roads get cleared, power gets restored, supplies get replenished, damage gets repaired. Life returns to normal, or close to normal, with the storm becoming memory rather than present reality. Communities that are struggling right now will get through this, because communities have always gotten through storms. The process takes time and effort and patience, but it happens. That's not empty optimism, it's historical fact. Every major winter storm in American history has been followed by recovery. This one will be too. What this storm will leave behind, beyond the physical recovery, is a set of lessons and questions. Questions about infrastructure resilience, whether power grids need to be hardened further, whether more lines should be buried, whether current systems are adequate for a climate where extreme events seem to be becoming more common. Questions about preparation, whether communities in areas that rarely see ice need better equipment, whether emergency response systems need more resources, whether warning and communication systems worked as well as they should have. Questions about policy, whether building codes need to account for extreme weather that historically was rare but might become less so, whether insurance frameworks are adequate, whether state and federal disaster response systems are properly funded and organised. These questions don't have simple answers. Infrastructure decisions involve trade-offs between cost and benefit, between preparing for rare events and managing limited resources. Emergency management systems can always be improved, but improvement requires funding and political will. Climate discussions quickly become polarized and political, making it difficult to have practical conversations about adaptation regardless of what's causing change. But this storm has revealed vulnerabilities in infrastructure, in systems, in preparation, and those vulnerabilities deserve honest assessment once the immediate crisis has passed. This storm will also leave behind stories, personal stories of struggle and survival, of kindness and community, of fear and resilience. These stories matter because they're how we process extreme events, how we make sense of experiences that disrupt normal life. The family that lost power for a week will tell that story for years. The stranded traveller who was helped by strangers will remember that kindness. The first responder who worked through dangerous conditions will carry those memories. The volunteer who spent days helping at a warming centre will have been changed by that experience. These stories become part of personal history, part of community identity, part of the larger American narrative of facing challenges and getting through them. For those watching this who aren't in the storm's path, who are experiencing this event through news coverage and videos and reports, rather than through personal experience, this storm offers its own lessons. It's a reminder of how dependent we are on systems and infrastructure that we usually take for granted. It's a demonstration of how quickly normal life can be disrupted when nature asserts itself. It's evidence that for all our technology and sophistication, we're still vulnerable to weather, still subject to forces we can't control. And it's also a reminder of human capacity for resilience and mutual aid, of the reality that when systems fail, communities often step up, that crisis brings out both the best and worst, but often more of the best. History will record this storm in meteorological terms, the numbers, the records, the measurements. But the real history is being written right now by millions of people living through it, the choices they're making, the challenges they're facing, the help they're offering and receiving. That human history won't be recorded in official reports, but it's just as real and just as important. It's the story of neighbours checking on neighbours, of families making do without power, of first responders working through danger, of communities pulling together. Those stories won't make it into textbooks, but they'll be told around dinner tables. They'll be part of family lore. They'll shape how people remember this winter. If you're watching this from an area that's being hit, know that you're not alone. Millions are experiencing this with you. Help is working toward you, utility crews, emergency responders, volunteers, supplies. The storm will end. Recovery will happen. You'll get through this, because people always do. Because there's no alternative but to endure and overcome. Take care of yourself and your family. Check on neighbours if you can do so safely. Accept help when it's offered. There's no shame in needing assistance during events like this. And know that your experience, your story, is part of something historic that will be remembered. If you're watching from outside the storm's path, recognise what you're witnessing. This is historic weather, the kind of event that happens rarely enough that it's remarkable when it does. Pay attention to the stories coming from affected areas. Look for ways to help if you're inclined. Many organisations are collecting donations and organising relief efforts. And remember that weather doesn't respect boundaries. That next time you might be the one in the path. That we're all vulnerable to forces larger than ourselves. The storm continues even as we reach the end of this discussion. Snow is still falling, ice is still accumulating, people are still struggling. But the end is coming, not tomorrow, but coming. The storm will move off the coast. The cold will moderate. Recovery will accelerate. And eventually, weeks from now, life will return to normal enough that this storm becomes memory rather than crisis. That transition from present emergency to past event is inevitable. How quickly it happens varies by location and impact, but it happens. What remains after the snow melts and power is restored and roads are repaired is the knowledge that we lived through something significant, that we witnessed and experienced weather that broke records and disrupted lives and tested systems. We'll carry that knowledge forward, apply whatever lessons emerge, tell the stories, remember what it was like. And when the next major storm comes, because it will, Eventually we'll reference this one. We'll compare. We'll use this storm as a benchmark the way we now use the blizzard of 93 and the 77 through 78 winter. That's how historic events work. They become reference points, markers, stories that get told. Right now, drop a comment sharing where you are and how you're doing. Let's check in with each other. This storm is affecting so many people across such a vast area that the comments section becomes a community space where we can see just how widespread this is, where we can support each other, where we can document what this moment is like from different perspectives. Share your experience. Read others' experiences. Recognise that while the specific details differ, the broader experience of facing this storm together is something millions share right now. Hit the like button if this video helped you understand what's happening, and subscribe so you don't miss updates as this situation continues developing and eventually transitions into recovery. More importantly, stay safe. Make good decisions. Don't take unnecessary risks. Accept that some things have to wait, that normal life is suspended for a few days, that getting through safely is more important than getting things done. This too shall pass. Winter storms test us. They always have. They strip away the complexity of modern life and reduce things to basics: staying warm, staying safe, helping each other, enduring until conditions improve. They expose vulnerabilities in infrastructure and systems, revealing where we're not as prepared as we thought. But they also reveal strength in communities that rally together, in neighbours who help neighbours, in first responders who face danger to help others, in the basic human resilience that persists through hardship. This storm is showing us both sides, the vulnerability and the strength. This storm will end. The cleanup will happen. The power will come back on. The roads will clear. The ice will melt. The cold will moderate. We'll add this week to our collection of winter stories, to the memories of storms weathered and challenges faced. And we'll do it the way Americans always have, with practical effort, mutual support, and determination to get through to the other side. This storm is historic. It's breaking records. It's disrupting life for tens of millions. But it's also temporary. We're weathering it together, and we'll come through on the other side, ready to tell the story of that January when half the country faced a record-breaking storm, and we got through it together.